Wisdom of the Middle Way. Nagarjuna's Mulamadhyamakarika. Translation and commentary by J. L. Garfield. Chapter 4, Examination of the Aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the basic Buddhist categories of personal constituents. The first that discussed as an example in this chapter is in Sanskrit rupa, in Tibetan gzugs. Unfortunately, given the lexicography of Western philosophy, this word has historically been translated as form. This practice is so ubiquitous that I am loath to depart from it, despite the confusion it engenders. For what the word means is matter. The other aggregates are sensation, perception, intellect, and the dispositions. It is important to realize that this taxonomy is to be understood pragmatically. There is no deep doctrinal or philosophical point that hangs on dividing the properties or capacities of humans up in just this way. In fact, most often the only important point about analysis in terms of the aggregates is that humans are composite. The precise nature of the best decomposition is of interest to psychology and to soteriological practitioners, but is at bottom, from the standpoint of the tradition, an empirical matter. This chapter is motivated by the natural suggestion that even if vision itself is empty, as was argued in the previous chapter, there must be a truly existent basis for vision in the person and her faculties. For the emptiness of vision was established in part by showing that perception depends upon the perceiver and the perceived. And that might seem to suggest that these bases, or at least the most essential one, the perceiver, truly exist. For then one could say that whereas vision itself is not inherently existent, it does exist as a relation between an inherently existent perceiver and an inherently existent object, or at least as a property of such a perceiver, even if there is truly no object. Nagarjuna aims to demonstrate the emptiness of all of the constituents of the person by taking form as an example and applying arguments that are general in scope. Form is taken as an example precisely because it is the most solid, apparently non-empty of the aggregates, the one that we are most likely to reify. So the program is to use arguments with application to any of the aggregates and to apply them to the hardest case. The conclusion Nagarjuna is after is that no decomposition of the person will yield constituents that are themselves independent and non-empty. 1. Apart from the cause of form, form cannot be conceived. Apart from form, the cause of form is not seen. Nagarjuna begins by making use of the results of the first chapter. Nothing arises causelessly, and no cause is ineffectual. So if any form exists, it exists with a cause. And if the cause of any form exists, so does that form. But there is an interesting problem to be posed: how about form itself, matter considered in general, not in its specific instances? Does it have a cause, or not? This question is important because it gets at the question of whether we can imagine ultimate ontological categories that exist independently. If form has a cause at all, it must be either the same or different from form. If the former, we have an infinite regress. If the latter, then we have the absurd conclusion that immaterial things can cause material things to come into existence. If it has no cause, then it cannot be said to exist at all. 2. If apart from the cause of form, there were form, form would be without cause. But nowhere is there an effect without a cause. If form as such exists without any cause, we would have an example of an inherently existent category. But that would also violate the principle of dependent origination. That is, both Nagarjuna and his opponent agree that all phenomena are dependently originated, and the discussion in the present chapter is in fact directed at figuring out just what material form depends on. So an attempt to posit material form as inherently existent on the grounds that it comes into existence causelessly is an ad hoc move that is unavailable to any participant in this debate. Moreover, Nagarjuna points out in the next verse, if we held form to be dependent upon a cause that was itself inherently existent, we would have an inherently existing cause without an inherently existing effect. That putative cause would, hence, fail to be a cause in the full sense. Between genuine causes and their effects there is a relation of dependence. 4. Something to count as a cause independent of its producing an effect would be incoherent. But since in the context of inherent existence merely conventional existence counts as no existence at all, an inherently existent cause with a merely conventionally existent effect would count just as much as an ineffective cause. So neither can we make sense of an inherently existent cause of the existence of material form if material form is held not to be inherently existent. 3. If apart from form there were a cause of form, it would be a cause without an effect. But there are no causes without effects. 4. When form exists, a cause of the arising of form is not tenable. When form is non-existent, a cause of the arising of form is not tenable. Any relationship between form and a putative cause is unintelligible, Nagarjuna argues, following closely the reasoning in Chapter 1. If form exists, the cause has ceased to exist. If form does not exist, the cause cannot have existed. This might seem at first glance to be a wholesale rejection of the possibility of dependency of effects on causal conditions. But if we recall the moral of Chapter 1 and keep the dialectical context of the current chapter firmly in mind, we will see that this is not so. The paradox of causal contact arises, as Sextus also notes, only if we suppose that the causes we appeal to in explanation must have some special force by means of which they bring about their effects. That, as we have seen, is the view of the causal link as inherently existent and